The life of Saint Anthony. Saint Anthony, whose baptismal name was Fernando Martins de Bulhon, was born on August 15, 1195, in Lisbon, Portugal. It is believed that his father, named Martin, was a captain in the royal army, and his mother, named Teresa, was a descendant of Royal I. They were a wealthy Christian family. Since he was a young boy, Fernando was known for his great piety and fervor in prayer. At the age of 15, he entered the community of canons regular of the Augustine Abbey on the outskirts of Lisbon. In 1212, distracted by the frequent visits from family and friends, he asked to be transferred to the mother house of the congregation in Coimbra to have more time to study, pray, and practice piety. Once the permission was given, he intensely studied the Augustine theology and Latin and was ordained a priest. He remained there for 9 years, and during those years, some Franciscan friars arrived and settled at a small hermitage outside Coimbra.
Fernando was strongly attracted to the simple evangelical lifestyle of the friars, whose order had been recently founded only 11 years from them by Saint Francis. One day, the bodies of 5 Franciscan martyrs were being carried in a procession to Fernando's monastery. Inspired by their example, and with the hope of becoming a martyr for Christ, Fernando went to the little friary in Coimbra and said to the brother, "Brother, I will gladly put on the habit of your order, if you will promise to send me as soon as possible to the land of the Saracens, that I may gain the crown of holy martyrs." After granted permission from the church authorities to leave the canon regular to join the new Franciscan order, he joined the small heritage of the Franciscans in Olivares, adopting the name of Anthony. In that same year, his wish to be sent as a missionary in Africa was fulfilled.
But God had other plans for him. When Fernando arrived in Africa, he became seriously ill, and after a few months, he was sent back to Portugal. On his way back, a violent storm blew his ship east into the Mediterranean and arrived months later to the east coast of Sicily, where he was welcomed by the friars at Messina, who nursed him back to health. Because this young man was out of town, he was sent to a provincial superior in northern Italy. Anthony did not mention his prior theological studies to them, but humbly asked the friars to instruct him in the Franciscan life, a life of seclusion and contemplation. He lived a quiet life of prayer and penance in hermitage.
Until one day, having realized that the priest who was supposed to give a sermon in ordination of some Dominicans and Franciscans in 1212 was going to be absent, and everybody else excused themselves not to do it, a friar ordered Anthony to give this sermon. Since Anthony presumably had no education, the friar told him to give just something simple. However, as he started speaking, the fire within Anthony was shown. Everyone was impressed by his knowledge, but his holiness is what really drew their attention. Having gotten news of this, Francis assigned Anthony to preach and teach theology in the cities of Bologna, Toulouse, Montpellier, and Padua, but in such a manner that the spirit of prayer be not extinguished either in yourself or in the other brethren.
During that time, most preachers did not live up to what they preached. Anthony noticed this and realized that he had not to only preach the gospel poverty, but to live it perfectly. As he did so, he re-established the clarity and strength of evangelization. He traveled tirelessly in both northern Italy and southern France, choosing to enter the cities in which the heretics were the strongest, and giving fervent sermons there. These sermons deeply moved and converted the hundreds of people that listened to them. For this reason, he is often referred to as the hammer of the heretic. Anthony presented the grandeur of Christianity in positive ways, with the hope of reconciling many souls to God. He also preached on the importance for everyone to draw closer to the sacraments, especially the Eucharist and reconciliation.
In fact, one time in Rimini, Anthony and a man made a deal. The man claimed that he would believe in the presence of Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament if his mule did. The unbelieving man would starve his mule for 3 days, and they would bring it in the town square, where Anthony would bring Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament. If the animal would come to Jesus in the monstrance rather than to a bucket of food that would be placed before it, then the man would believe that. On the third day, the man came into the town square with his very hungry mule. St. Anthony approached from the other side of the square with the sacred host. Many people, both believers and unbelievers alike, watched to see what would happen. A large bucket of oats and a bundle of fragrant hay were placed before the hungry animal. But all this was ignored by the mule. Instead, the mule approached our saint and fell before her knees before the Blessed Sacrament to adore Jesus. True to his word, the man made a profession of faith in the Blessed Sacrament.
Another very important event that St. Anthony is known for was the apparition of the infant Jesus. One day, Count Tiso, a man who provided a chapel and a hermitage for the friars in his castle, saw Anthony's cell filled with light, and St. Anthony carrying the infant Jesus in his arms and communicating with him. When the vision ended, Anthony saw Count Tiso and begged him not to tell anyone of the apparition until after his death. For this reason, he is usually depicted carrying the infant Jesus in his arms.
St. Anthony spent the last year of his life in Padua, where he gave even more fervent sermons than before, and to as many as 30,000 people at once. He would spend all of his day teaching and hearing confessions, as well as fasting, but following Francis' command to not extinguish the spirit of prayer, he would also spend many hours at night praying in solitude to God.
Exhausted because of the great amount of energy spent during the Lenten season in 1231, Anthony went to a little town near Padua, but noticing he was facing death, he set off back to Padua, the city he loved most. Finding himself extremely weak, they stopped at Arcella, where he received the last sacraments, sang, and prayed with the friars there. When one of them asked Anthony what he was staring at so intently, he answered, "I see my Lord," and died. He was only 36 and had been a Franciscan for 10 years.
Pope Gregory IX, who had known Anthony personally, had called him Ark of the Covenant and Casket of the Sacred Scriptures, declared him a saint only 11 months after his death. This has been one of the fastest processes of canonization ever.
In 1946, St. Anthony was declared a doctor of the Church. God has performed many miracles by the intercession of St. Anthony, even after his death. For example, many sick people would be cured after visiting his tomb a few years after he died. Another impressive miracle is that upon exhumation of his body, 36 years after his death, they found that his body was made dust, but his tongue was completely incorrupted. People believe that this is because of his perfect preachings. St. Anthony's influence in the world is still felt today. From North America to Brazil and Europe, and even in Asia, his feast day is celebrated with parades and marriages, since he is also known as the marriage saint because it is said that he would reconcile many couples. The most famous shrine dedicated to him is the Basilica of San Antonio de Padua in Padua, Italy. We chose to do the saint because we figured that many of you did not know about his life. So I hope that after watching this, you can have a better appreciation of this great patron saint of ours.